starting with when you would determine whether something is a financial mistake in the first place. And this is more about time horizon for evaluating an investment opportunity. And we come to this very frequently in our work where we have someone where we've either made an investment recommendation, an investment management recommendation, or they bring an investment recommendation to us. And it's not as much about finding the date as it is about finding the date that's too soon to evaluate the investment. What I mean by that is, for example, with an investment recommendation or an investment manager, it is highly likely that a person is going to look back after the first year and want to make some decisions if it did not perform up to their expectations. When in reality, whether it's an index fund, an ETF, a stock, an investment manager, a year is simply not long enough to determine whether it's just a blip in the road or whether there's a strong indicator that there's something wrong with what you've chosen. For example, with a single stock, it may be a company that's well positioned for the future, but they just had a bad product rollout or they were adversely impacted by the tariff conversation. With real estate, it depends on why you bought the real estate, but we have people who often try to evaluate a property too soon. Now, if you're trying to buy and flip a property, then maybe after a year or 2 years, there is the opportunity to look back and say this was or was not a mistake. But if you're buying something that's intended to be a long-term buy and hold property, maybe as rental real estate, and you're upset because it hasn't turned a profit in the first 6 months or the first 9 months or the first 18 months, you have to determine going into the process what your time horizon is for evaluating whether it's just truly you being a little jumpy or if it's not performing as you expected. And the place that I see this the most, at least in terms of financial decisions, is with permanent life insurance. And this is something that we haven't talked about a ton on this podcast for good reason. It is because while there are life insurance policies that have an investment component, I'm not a financial advisor who's okay with pitching a policy as if it's an investment itself. It's a very different thing evaluating how a permanent life insurance policy may fit into a full financial portfolio as compared to the way that you would evaluate a non-qualified brokerage account. But unfortunately, there are some advisors who pitch it as kind of one and the same, or even worse, oh, all you have to do is the life insurance policy. And because you're doing it, you don't need to do those other forms of investments. And I think that's really dangerous because oftentimes when you're comparing a permanent life insurance policy to a more traditional investment, there's a misunderstanding of how one works versus the other. For example, if you put $1,000 into a non-qualified brokerage account, aside from maybe some internal expenses of an index fund or an ETF, you're going to have most of that $1,000 going to your investment. Conversely, with a permanent life insurance policy, you have a policy value or a cash value inside of that policy where your quote unquote investment dollars would go. But there also are insurance costs associated with the fact that it is still a life insurance policy, and the insurance company wants you to compensate them for the risk that you might die, and they have to pay the claim. So over the course of time, more and more goes to your policy or cash value. But in the first few years, a small amount goes. You may put $2,000 into that policy in a year, and you may have $500 go to your policy value. It gets better over time, but there also are things like surrender charges, where if you were to cancel that policy at some point within the first 10 years, you're not even going to be able to recoup all of the money that you see in your policy value. Does that mean that you should never have a permanent life insurance policy? Absolutely not. I have permanent life insurance, although I would say there's a great number of people who should avoid it. But it does mean that in terms of when you evaluate the mistake, if you're going to it and looking, saying, hey, after 2 or 3 years, I'm going to determine whether this was the right move, you're looking at an investment that is just simply not structured to be able to make an educated and informed decision in that period of time. So step one, determine when you are going to look back and evaluate whether you've made a mistake.